It starts by bribing your comp leader and decorating his office and feeding him food and making sure he gets on the same page as you. I think that's the strategy here.
So if we don't take anything else away when AI summarizes this meeting, bribery works. So that's going to be how it gets summarized.
Well, hello again. Welcome to another totally rewarding chat. I am Paul, as always, joined by my friend Sean. Say hi, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
You have not used that joke yet.
And no, I've been waiting because you know, I've driven something. I've been waiting, so that's great.
I love it. And we are super excited to be joined today by Holly Fouraker. Say hello, Holly.
Good morning. Hello.
All right. I appreciate that she said more than just like.
Yeah, I know. I was really hoping you'd lean into that, Holly, and catch him on twice, but that was your opportunity.
Yes. So Holly and I know each other, but just so I don't read my bias into her background, Holly, why don't you share a little bit of who you are, your career background, and what you're doing today? What's your current role?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. I got my master's degree in industrial organizational psychology. Ended up starting out in talent acquisition in workforce analytics, actually using bioresume data and cognitive ability assessments and trying to predict the right fit for a candidate on the right job profile. Got really curious then about what happens after I passed them off from TA. So ended up falling in love with talent management and did some time at Sears Holdings back in 2013-ish for a few years when, the idea of eliminating performance reviews and really democratizing engagement and these sorts of things kind of came to light. So got to do a lot of really cool, innovative, build in-house sort of work there. Took that with me to follow a CHRO, actually, I worked for in the education sector to build out an HR function. Still a lot of my time in the talent management space, ended up picking up talent acquisition. And then, it's a volatile industry. Ended up moving into tech, and that's where I met Paul at CDK, still running the talent function and partnering closely with him on the comp side. Got my HRBP rotation there, which was super helpful in my career journey. And now I am currently the head of HR for a company called Instructure, who you may be familiar with because we're the makers of Canvas. So any of you with kiddos and the platform that you use to track your grades and content delivery through the schools and the teachers and the instructors. So it's been a really wild journey, but a very exciting one.
Yeah. So listeners and watchers will quickly figure out Holly is not our normal reward-oriented guest. And just a quick preview, we'll get back to it. We're going to talk today more about the partnership with the non-reward folks. And she's going to pick on me a little bit since we have some shared experiences. So
I'm glad all my kids are off the payroll now because Canvas came up with some interesting adjectives at that time. Yeah, at the time. I think mostly because they don't like things documented for their parental units. That's a big piece of, that why they didn't like it. That's super cool. Yeah.
So before we jump in, let's get to know Holly a little bit more. So we're going to start with the speed round. So I'm just going to ask you some quick, almost this or that style questions. Sean doesn't know these either. So we'll start with some layups. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Yep. I knew that one.
All day.
All day.
We had a lot of conversations about coffee because, Paul, you're also a coffee drinker, but you're a very particular coffee drinker as well.
Total coffee snob. I'm all about that.
Yeah.
All right. You and the family have a weekend away. Are you out in the woods camping or are you living it up in a resort somewhere?
We are definitely out in the woods camping. We've got an RV. It's our favorite way to spend our summers. I've got an almost 1-year-old and we've had him in the RV plenty of times this summer.
Yeah. So this is one I regretted a little bit because this is sort of a recurring bit we ask about because Sean and I are as different as it gets, Holly, here. As you know, like a Marriott's roughing it for me. And I'm like, do I skip this question? Because I know that Holly's on team.
Would have come back, Paul. I'm not going to lie. If you skipped it, I'd have been like, I need to ask because I know. Because we were on a run of filling up the resorts for a while. So I'm super stoked to hear that, Holly, that you're on the right side of this.
We actually spent 10 days in Puerto Rico 2 years ago, didn't visit a single beach or resort. Like we were out in the middle of the mountains in the middle of where there were like no tourists. Further the better for me.
You and the Go Keys, right? That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's your chef creation that you are the most proud of?
Well, this feels like a trap question because I think the answer should be a 12-pound smoked brisket, which I still owe Paul Ryman for many favors I've called in over the years. I will get you that brisket sometime soon, but
I would mail it to him.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I would mail it in groundwork. Nothing quick. Yeah.
That's what you owe the most. But what are you most proud of?
It
Like,
is.
what's your thing? Like, no, this is my special.
I do a lot of baking and I do a lot of cakes, and those are a labor of love. I've got one I'm making actually this weekend, and I've got like sketches and designs and homemade marshmallow fondant and all sorts of cutters and tools and things like that. So those are always fun to kind of see finished and see all the hard work you put into it, even though I always have that pain of like you spent 4 days and it's gone in 3 minutes and destroyed as soon as you cut into it.
Make it taste worse, and then it won't be gone in 3 minutes. Like,
Right.
you caused your own problem there.
Exactly. You remember the time, Paul, I gave you the plate for Christmas with the cookies on it? And you were kind of
Yeah.
like, this is cool, but I'm not going to do anything with the plate because I don't plan on giving anybody else cookies. I just want the cookies.
I
You
mean,
don't appreciate my baked goods.
I know what I'm after. Like,
For sure.
absolutely. Um, who's the smartest person you ever decorated an office for?
That's an easy one. His name's Paul Ryman. I was very, very serious about making sure that he did not go anywhere in his early days or run for the hills. And it did worry me that like 3 or 4 weeks in, you look like you were just hoteling in that space. And I was like, I gotta fix this. So I don't even remember where I got them. Pictures of your family. I had stuff printed, mounted. I did photos framed,
Wow.
all sorts of stuff on your
Yeah.
desk. Like I made you stick around.
There's a LinkedIn post about this. Literally, and I still, I have a whiteboard behind me. I'm not a high design person, and I just showed up one day, and literally there were one creepy, like, stalked my family Facebook, I guess, like pictures of my kids. I'm like, that's a little weird, but like customized stuff. We're not talking about like just generic pictures. So like I'm redecorating my office right now. So like this was one, right? A hand painted bow tie, right? To sort of honor my bow tie things. Like we're not talking
So
like
and so did you change? Did you leave the office like that for a long time then?
forever until I left.
Yeah, he never touched it.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it was impressive. It was amazing.
We had
And
little
so I'm
fidgety
like,
things, I think, on your desk, maybe like a Rubik's Cube or something like totally mind-bending. Keep you
yes,
occupied, keep you
it was
engaged.
personalized. We're not talking about a generic office decoration. Like it was a lot. Um, yeah. All right, and then the last one, also one of our staples: chunky or creamy peanut butter. And do you make your
Cream.
own? Because I could see you
Creamy for
making it.
sure. I have made my own. I don't for like the usual day to day, but yeah, Vitamix blender, some organic peanuts, some salt. That's it. Pistachio butter we do.
Pistachio butter. Wow, that's one I haven't heard. As you
Ah.
know, with the peanut allergy in the family, not me, but like we're always looking for alternative things. I've
You
never
make
heard of pistachio.
pistachio butter that way, actually, instead of peanut
Yeah,
butter.
pistachio butter,
With a
cashews, throw it in a
pistachio.
Vitamix, a little bit of oil, let it run for a few minutes, and that's it.
Wow.
Actually, I'm gonna ask Paul. Like, is the peanut allergy not a pistachio allergy? Right?
It is peanuts only. So he's one of those. It is uniquely just peanuts, not
Okay.
other nuts. And he
You can
loves
have
other nuts. Thank
pistachio butter.
goodness. Yeah. Pistachio we haven't
Interesting.
tried. So that'll be on the
Okay.
list, I guess. Look at that. Well, thank you, Holly, for indulging us in some fun stories there. I'm sure there might be some more to come still, if I have an inkling. So as I previewed a little bit, our theme today is all around the partnership between sort of rewards and other functions. So Holly was my partner in that crime, if you will, at times, both as a talent acquisition leader, I mean, broader talent, but really our partnership was around TA mostly. But then also as an HR business partner, since you transitioned roles while we were both together there.
Yeah.
So in that, we're going to talk about some things you loved and things you wished, right? So what were some things you appreciated about the partnership? It doesn't have to be about me, more about the functions, or it could be about me. And then things you wished, right? What were the things that either were impossible or that you just were finding really difficult in partnering with the rewards function? So that's sort of the structure. And I'd love to start with TA, just because there's a lot of buzz in the sort of comp community in particular about how to best partner with the TA function. So let's start with there. So like, what are some things that you found valuable or you see really important about the partnership between a TA team and a rewards team?
Yeah, it's a really great question. On the TA side in particular, I think the thing I loved most about the partnership that we had, Paul, in particular, is your team was very, very data focused. And that I know it's kind of the buzz thing out there. Everybody talks about like, need to use data and, be strategic. But really there's so much emotion in the talent acquisition process, whether it's the employee who's trying to secure their financial situation for their family as they consider a job move or compare an offer that they've got on the table, to the recruiter who's motivated to close the deal, and the HR business partner who's trying to secure the resource for the business that's putting pressure on them. There's a lot of personal emotions that happen in that process, and there's a lot of conversations that happen not grounded in data, right? I think I'm worth more, or somebody else offered me more, or the comp package is different because I'm coming from a publicly traded company to a privately owned company, and all the things in between. And of course, you add all the economic pressures too, which is now you've got millions of people with their own interpretation of what is a reasonable cost of increase in wages and inflation and all of this stuff. And so having that data centric conversation to say, like, what is it we're actually trying to solve? What is the candidate need? What does the business need? And how do we find somewhere in between that is economic for us as a business, but also tugs at the right heartstrings of the candidate to make them feel good about walking in the door, that they got a deal, I think is really important. And you always put pressure on us to say, like, what are you actually trying to solve for? I'm hearing they want more, but like, what is more? Like, how are we, what do we, how do we solve for that? So that was really always helpful. And you personally always challenged me because I'd come to you sometimes with like, I believe this is the issue. And you're like, is it? Is it? And really try to understand like the core of what was going on. So I think that is just really crucial because there is so much rich data to understand the market. The unique thing is you were able to help us translate that into a conversation to the candidate, right? Because no candidate wants to hear, well, the market rages, or Radford tells us, or the 25th percentile of the range is. So being able to translate that data into like a human conversation too really helps.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good start. I think data doesn't lie to some extent, right?
But I think it's super huge, actually. Having been a recruiter, there's one of the things I wish, I mean, you lean into that, Holly, that everyone in comp could go through a recruitment process as the recruiter, because you get personally vested, you get down that line, you've got pressure from the manager. I really like Paul, you got all this pressure, and that emotional piece, as I said, humans are, this is to me, the cool intersection is humans are highly statistically predictable, but individually unique. And so that piece is where that emotion comes in. So I think that's awesome that you highlighted that, Holly, because I think comp sometimes it's like you're 1 degree away from that actual feeling that pressure. And they like to throw them under the bus for compression, but it's hard to not walk that mile in their shoes. So I think that's a super point.
Yeah. And acknowledging the tension, right? Like, I get it. You were being measured and monitored on time to fill and number of open roles at one phase before the business sort of went in a different direction, right? But like in growth phase, TA is under the gun for like, get it closed. And I'm under the gun for sort of thoughtful cost. And those are in conflict, right? Like, we can close these roles a lot faster if we paid them all $1 million, but we're not going to do that. So let's acknowledge the
manager
tension.
can't, the manager then says I couldn't fill it, so I'm not going to meet my numbers, and TA gets put back in the bullseye. So it is, I think, having that understanding, Holly, is really important, I think, for people in comp.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing you mentioned, which I want to, the problem focus, right? Because what I found on the reward side is that recruiters will oversimplify the feedback a bit. No offense, recruiters, but it's like, well, our offer wasn't good enough. All right, let's unpack that a little bit. We wouldn't approve that $10,000 salary increase that I needed to close them. Well, did you try anything else? Like, what was really their feedback? Were we addressing an equity gap? Were we like, what was the problem, right? Rather than the dogmatic, it just needed to be bigger.
Well, and you get that by asking those questions, right? I mean, it's one of the things I still use that I think I learned from you, Paul, in practice is like right tool for the right fit. Because a lot of times recruiting and HRBPs and other functions come back and say, to your point, it's not good enough. They want more. Well, more of what? To do what? Are you trying to secure this resource for multi-years? Are you trying to pay a very competitive wage? Are you trying to get them to stay within parity of the other team members? Like, what lever within there, instead of just throwing dollars at any lever that we can to hit that emotional piece, right?
Now, so it's sort of following still this sort of problem and data focus. So it was relatively easy for you and I to get on the same page. let's talk a little bit about the dynamic, because you were the leader. You weren't a direct recruiter. You had a team of recruiters, right? I had a team of comp people, right? So let's think about like, how do leaders then create shared approach that? Because it's easy for two humans to sort of get on the same page. It's hard to get two teams on the same page. So is there anything that you recall or that you see today even where like teams need to align in different ways? Is there something different about getting everyone on the same page there?
I think it starts with the philosophy and having the shared unified philosophy. And I think you and I did a really great job of showing up as one unit and one team and never felt like, well, I can't give you that because comp said no, right? Like you and I worked very hard to say, well, let's have a meeting with the recruiters and let's bring the comp team there and let's show them that you and I are thinking about it the same way, not taking action the same way or agreeing on the outcome necessarily or the lever, but let's step back and here's how we think about it. Here's what we want to do. Here's what it looks like and here's what it feels like. And now how can we help them all in the course of business like exude that same philosophy, knowing that there's a framework around how we think about it, not just a yes, no, or a matrix to say if this, then I can offer that, and if that, I can offer this. And I think that was really helpful, both when we went to HRLT together to share our philosophy, but also just day to day within our teams. People saw that as a unified approach.
That's actually a really important point, like the shared accountability and sort of shared ownership of an outcome. Like it actually wasn't on the comp side of my house, but I remember specifically during the Workday implementation, right? Like, for those of you who are watching or listening and don't know this, like Workday's recruiting product was meh in sort of circa 2020, not 2020, 2020. But we were going there, and Holly could have thrown me under that bus many times, right? And sort of played the victim with her team. Didn't happen, right? It was, nope, we've made this decision. Here's why. We need good infrastructure. We need to resource it smartly. We don't need to go build our own thing. And as a result, we're going to make some compromise, right? Like, so it's not the reward side, it's more the ops side. But I think that shared, no, we need to do this and here's why. And it's not about us versus them. It's about let's get this outcome together.
But it is that language change, right? Like it is the behavior change of it. I mean, even I remember us being really intentional about saying when you go back to the candidates, it's not we can't. We can do anything in the comp realm. It's we aren't, and here's why. Like we as a collective organization, not comp won't let me have that, or HRBP said no, and we made these decisions, and here's why.
I think what's interesting in that, even one step before that, probably depending where people come from, is making sure you're speaking the same language. So I think that education of like, here's a comp ratio, here's a range, here's a whatever, so that, and same thing for TA, like here's all the things we look at, here's the metrics, here's the whatever. So everybody understands, they're saying the same thing, and so there's no miscommunication, and they understand their goals. I think that's really important. And, that starts, obviously the two of you got together and were like, we have the same goals, and like, here's the language. I think that's really
it starts by bribing your comp leader and decorating his office and feeding him food and making sure he gets on the same page as you. I think that's the strategy here.
So if we don't take anything else away when AI summarizes this meeting, bribery works. So that's going to be how it gets summarized.
And I'll even volunteer. Like bribery works in the face of sort of non-responsive partners. Like I actively tried to get Holly in trouble. Like I was a troublemaker and a pot stirrer to some extent, right? So like she was going uphill there and trying to bribe.
Sure was. Tried to have a little fun in the office with some Nerf guns and backfired a little bit, pun intended. I got called out for playing too many games in the office, Paul, and you hid your Nerf gun in your drawer like you'd never seen it before.
I mean, the important
drawer
choice.
You provided him in his nicely decorated office.
Yes.
I mean, his office was directly across from mine too, so all it took was him to like kind of squeeze out the door and fire one off across the room, and like that was it. I'd be mid-conference call going, what the heck is happening? And it took once for somebody to come down and say, what is happening down here? And Paul's like, I'm just working on comp stuff. I don't know.
Totally. Well, and part of it, I had these wonderfully, like if you ever, in Men in Black, the noisy cricket, like these tiny, tiny little Nerf guns that could still shoot really far. Holly's reciprocation was to bring in like this mega battery powered Gatling gun, essentially. So like I could very easily sort of go incognito and hide it while still torturing her window across the hallway. She couldn't.
Yeah.
She had to step out with this thing. It was it was a beast. So, trouble comes
Oh,
your
but
way
having fun in the
sometimes.
office helps and definitely helps the relationship building.
There is some truth to that. Like we just recorded another episode where we were talking about like if you're trying to make change and sort of get functions aligned, and where does that start? Lunch was my first response. Like it's the relationship matters, particularly among leaders. Not everybody's going to have a perfect relationship, of course, but it does start with a little bit of we're humans, and let's just get to know each other. Particularly when you're trying to make change together. Like you can coexist pretty easily, but if you're trying to be transformative, you got to have some trust, and trust doesn't come from the data first, right? It comes from people being people.
It's important for other people to see it too. I mean, I think our teams did know that you and I were connected, that if there was an issue, we would work through it. If we had opposing views, we'd figure it
Yep.
out and at least come to an agreement. Like they felt that from us, I think.
Yeah. Particularly since I think both of our predecessors, because you entered the TA role not that long before I joined. Our predecessors weren't always on the same page, and it was visible.
Correct.
Right? So we had to overcome that sort of organizational baggage, definitely. Yeah. Anything else on the like good sort of key practice side that you would say is important about the TA to rewards partnership?
I think the other one we brushed lightly, but I really think that concept of right tool for the right purpose, philosophy and arrangement mattered. Like understanding comp in a common language for non-comp people. I think we assume a lot of times that all of HR can speak all things HR, and the reality is comp still is a very complex space. And I know a lot of HRBPs that don't fully understand it and don't understand how the ranges get refreshed and how the market data gets interpreted. There's a huge education piece there. And I think you were able to really distill that down into really simple terms for people to make it less about, like, we don't care that it came from Radford, right? We just want to know what the grid says that I can go do something with. But I want to understand the context of how it gets created enough that I can explain it to a candidate or a TA leader or a recruiter, and they can understand it in a way that they can utilize it properly. The storytelling piece of it, the simplification of it, even I remember your position management example, and you actually put a chair in the middle of the room and you put post-it notes on the chair, and you're like, guys, like, let's break this down. And that seemed oversimplified at the time, but it resonated with people and it got people thinking about the entire construct differently. So it helped us then to move to a place where we can say, okay, within all of these things that we now understand, what are we trying to do with each of these tools and how do we use them properly?
That's a good point. I think, Sean, I feel like I've heard you speak on this before too. Like the comp people are special, and you've got to find a way to translate like into words that people understand, right? Like whether it's an employee, whether it's a TA partner or whatever, like we have to find ways to move the metaphor away from comp ratios, range penetration, percentiles, but into just real words.
Even range penetration, like that subtle example, Paul, of like comp ratio. Range penetration is a lot easier to explain than comp ratio. A number of a number sounds like somebody just wanted to create some math, right? Whereas the range, I think they can get their idea of in a range, right? And how far you're into that range, right? And I think that's a good example of probably the comp community not even realizing they're making this subtle change over time to something that is, more understandable by people, even if that's not the reason it's happening, right? We're seeing it. And we've heard a bunch of people, I ask sometimes, Holly, on their, comp ratio or range penetration as one of the speed round questions. And we have had a couple people say for comp ratio, for communication, range penetration.
Yeah,
and you're starting to see that, people starting to understand, I need to translate that.
Yeah. 100%.
Totally. So let's flip it a little bit. So you can pick on me, have at it, or you can
please do.
generally. But what are the things you found difficult, or what are the things that you could, if you could wave a magic wand, would be different about sort of how rewards functions partner with TA? Let's stay focused on TA for now. Like what's on the wish list side?
So I think one of the big things that will always kind of be a battle, but I think is starting to get better, is this notion that I know better because I'm in it doing it, and you're sitting behind the scenes in the COE. And so the perception of like who knows the best about the end client and what we're doing. I, of course, sat in the COEs and now sit in a generalist role. So I've learned a lot over the years about things that I may have been assuming from sitting behind the scenes too. I think it's really hard for the COEs to get the same level of perspective as the business partner or the recruiter that is sitting right there doing it. And I think that takes a lot of time to try to build that trust that you understand the problem the same that we do as we're sitting there in front of the client having to have the conversation, or the candidate having the conversation. And so, I think the responsibility of that lies on both teams. The recruiters need to help bring the comp team along to understand what is actually happening. What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What are the reactions that we're getting? Strip just the emotional side of it and bring our comp team along as true partners and understand the problem the same that we do. And it takes the comp team saying, I want to understand the problem better too. Like, help me understand it from your perspective, because I can give you, all the reasons why we should or shouldn't based on the data and the math, but sometimes that can strip the emotional side of it that we have to deal with on the front lines too.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, the triangle of sort of TH or VP and a comp partner, if you're large enough or you're lucky enough to have a resource that's sort of thinking about a business unit, like, you've all got to be really good at understanding a job and what is it doing? How does it work within our ecosystem? What are the key skills, just to use the skills buzzword, right, that I need to know and decide how does that impact how we want to pay it? That is hard. I agree with you. Like, that's difficult to scale because an HR partner has a pretty small library of jobs in many cases within their remit because they're focused on a function, right, in many circumstances. Whereas a comp partner often has a bigger portfolio, and it's just difficult to be deeply expert in every job. And the same is definitely true for TA, right? So yeah, I think that's an interesting, like, I wish is, could we all just magically get smarter and know all the jobs in detail? But boy, that's difficult.
Yeah, it is very hard. And I think, there's a lot more effort that we can think strategically about how we do that so that we don't just end up saying, well, you just don't understand, right? That's not the solution either. So
yeah. But I think one thing comp people can do to progress that a bit, like, especially when you're new or getting to know the org, like, kind of ask for a fly on the wall spot for a while, like actually participate in that engineering leader meeting, right? To get to know the vibe a bit and, do some special work outside of the day-to-day to understand how that org works. Like, it's an investment, I guess is my point. Like, comp people be willing to invest in getting to know that business a bit better.
You make a rolling, it's interesting. I think the time when that best happens is when you do job architecture project. But weirdly enough, they outsource that a lot. And like, the big thing that happens for all the right reasons, right, that they might outsource it, time and whatever. But the thing that gets lost is all those interviews on what this position does and the position description. And that just, if you hire a consultant for that, consultants, that business then leaves. That leaves if you don't do a really good knowledge transfer, or really document that. And that kind of rolling JA review, like, to your point, Paul, of like being a fly on the wall or going and do like a function or family review, even when you're not going to change the JA, is really important so that you can then sit down. Same thing for TA. Like, TA, a lot of times, man, I mean, I've been on both sides of it, right? You go to interview for a job and you're like, bro, that is not what you told me that job is, right? Like, you start getting in and asking the people who are there and you're like, what am I doing here, right? And so I think it's on both sides. So then, again, they're comparing apples to apples because, worst case, Paul, they're recruiting for this position. They bring in people and are like, well, we have to pay this much. And you're like, well, that's sure for that person, but that's not the person we need for that job.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good one. Any others on the wish list? What else was hard, or what else do you wish were?
This is the time, Holly, I'm just going to highlight. Like, if you have any dirt or anything else on Mr. Ryman, at least one person I know would like to hear it.
No dirt. Paul was an excellent partner, great friend.
Oh my God, the Golden Shovel Award.
I do think, I mean, if we want to go there a little bit, I do think, Paul, Paul's not paying me to say this, but Paul is an extremely intelligent leader and, very, very good comp leader. And as a result, I think what can happen when you've got people who are in this domain who tend to think very analytically like this is you were sometimes 3 or 4 steps ahead on the thinking and the manifestation of how you get from A to Z through all of these complex levers, right? Whether it was, we did the job architecture project, that was a massive project, right? And you were like, yeah, and here's what it looks like at the end. And we were all like, so what do we do today? Like, what do we say about JDs? And you had to really bring us along for that journey. But that created some tension sometimes because it could feel like, well, Paul thinks he's got it all figured out, but like we're still trying to figure out whether or not step 1, 2, and 3 look right and whether or not that's right for our business before we have to go back to our leaders and explain this. And so I think just like that capacity piece around, how far ahead do you get and how do you bring people along with you? You had very strong opinions at times. And I knew from working with you long enough that I could decipher, where is this kind of a non-negotiable? Like he's already determined that this is how the strategy
work, yeah.
needs to be. And where is there room for us to say, I don't think that's going to work. Let's figure out something else. But it was a little bit of a journey at times.
No, that's a great lesson learned because reward leaders it's an expert function, right? Like that's how we've tended to grow into that chair, is that we know our space deeply. And the marathon analogy is real, right? Where you can be at the front end of this and there's a whole bunch of people that are just starting the race and you've got to remember to bring them along. Yeah, Holly being one of 4 people in the world who have seen sort of my Hogan assessment, right? Like she like, because you were on the recruitment side when I was being recruited and did these sort of entrance assessments. Yeah, you were quick to sort of point out some like, when we had this conversation and you were hired, it said this about you. Guess what? Like you're showing that trait right now that you are not bringing us along for the journey. So that's actually, I think that's super, accurate feedback for me personally.
That highlights
and
also
important.
That highlights that lunch, that lunch thing, Paul.
Yes.
Right? So like being able to have that discussion and know the old inductive versus deductive reason, how you're going to bring someone from point A to point B. Like I think having that relationship and understanding how people learn and do whatever. Otherwise, if it's just in that moment, you're bound to get it wrong, right? For at least half the people. So
I wasn't his business partner at the time, but just as a peer, having that psychological safety in the relationship to say, this isn't working for me right now. Let me explain why, and have him be like, all right, what do you need from me?
Right. Yeah. Slow your roll, right? Like I get it. Right. You've got a vision. However, like we all got to buy in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it probably goes on the sort of wish side too. We talked about a little bit of a strength, like that shared approach, but we learned quickly if you and I, or me and another HRBP walked into a leadership meeting already on the same page, it was really hard for it to go the other direction. Whereas if I came in and made a pitch, or if you came in and made a pitch, God knows what was going to happen in that discussion, right? So like it highlighted the need for pre-alignment sometimes, and that's not political. It's more like just make sure you've vetted it, you've thought it through, and that everybody sees that you've done that homework. Like that was a lesson learned for me, is like, even though you've got the right answer, vet it first and sort of make sure that the questions are worked out. Absolutely. So there's some additional collaboration I think would be on the wish list there. Just make sure that you're sort of working together before sort of the big meeting, if you will.
Even if it meant getting on board, not totally being aligned on all the pieces, but being able to say, we agree, we're moving forward. Here's.
Yeah, totally. So did you find, it was about a year, I think, before I left the organization, but you moved into a partner role rather than a sort of COE specialist TA role. Are the lessons the same, or is there anything that was sort of different when you sat in the HRBP chair that you found you loved or you wished about your partnership with awards? Like did anything change about that relationship, and any advice for awards people about that?
I think there's a lot of the same lessons to learn, like the relationship matters, the data matters, bringing people along for the story and intersecting the data, the technology, the human component matters. I think the technology came a lot more into play in that business partner relationship as you talk about like year-end comp planning and merit planning and bonus allocation and all of these other things now at a much grander scale. Our engineering teams were 1,000+ person teams. Like that was no small exercise. And so the method in which we articulated that and then built it into the tool and then realign on a shared philosophy around how we were actually going to have people interact with those tools and systems when, recruiting, the easier thing about recruiting is that it's very point in time, right? There's a start and a finish to it. And then you're done with that particular engagement and you move on. The business partner relationship is ongoing. Like every day you're kind of being tested to say, how do I continue to add value? And how do I continue to help my leader understand how to do these things in a slightly different way and a different person and a different team every single day using the same umbrella set of philosophies, tools, and resources and data. So I think a lot of shared lessons learned. I think the understanding of the business comes into even bigger scope there because I think once you, as a comp partner, once you understand what's happening on the front lines in recruitment, like you kind of get it, right? There might be some nuance from candidate to candidate, but you're applying the same principles. The business is ever changing. And so as soon as something flips, like you've almost got to reteach your comp partners what it is that you're trying to do now or why the change. And that just never ends. Like that's an ongoing muscle.
Yeah. I think the other thing I learned over time is that the HRBP's customer is a very different customer. So or in the recruitment side, it's a candidate and a hiring manager, but you're right, it's sort of temporal. It sort of happens and it's done. The customer is like leaders and managers and employees. Like it's just a very different demand from the HR partner. And it was more important to give different sort of talking points so that the HR partner could use the right ones for the right people, right? Like, here's what you are going to say to the engineering leader. Here's what you can say to their direct reports. Here's what you don't say to sort of managers and employees, but here's what you can say, right? So like thinking through how does the HR partner use it because they have a multifaceted sort of customer base. So that storytelling, which was on the TA side, sort of came into play, but as a rewards partner, you had to be more ready to equip HR partners to sort of face those not that you can't trust them to figure it out, but be a good partner and help them think through, like, what is the right way to say this, to 1,000 engineers, which is, a tough audience, obviously.
I think the trickier part about that, even though, is in TA, a lot of times it's a script, right? It's go back and tell the candidate this. And if they have questions, like you jumped on the phone with plenty of our higher level roles to say, let me walk them through the equity component because they may understand it better coming from me. But you get caught off the cuff a lot in the HRBP role, right? So it's not about just like, here are the words that you use. You had to train us and we had to train them, again, how to think about it and be able to craft those responses using kind of a general direction of the language that we wanted to be consistent across the organization. And now you're back to human behavior change, not math.
Yeah. Humans.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the technology showed up a little bit different in sort of the partnership as an HR partner. I guess let's dive into that a little bit more. And I think what you meant by that is just there's just more, I don't want to call it transactions, but there's all these interactions that sort of tech can power. But I guess say a little bit more about what you meant there, I guess, just to unpack.
Yeah. So let's use year-end as an example, because I think that's where we see the technology either work for people or work against people and give HR a good reputation or a bad reputation very quickly. Nobody loves the year-end process. I don't care how clean your system is. Nobody enjoys doing that January, February. But I've seen it done really both ways, right? Where the tool is designed to give you the answer and create this burdensome HR process that they've got to go in and click, but we've already kind of predefined what you can and can't do. And it just feels yucky and people feel like they're handcuffed and it's just an administrative process. I think one of the things that we got really smart about is how do we use the tool to help drive the thinking without giving them the answer, and enabling the HRBPs to ask the right questions that were thought-provoking against what the business needed to apply the right judgment to then make the right decision in the tool, where the tool would not let them mess it up too bad, but also wouldn't penalize them for like not getting it perfect, right? And so, being able to make those intelligent decisions within some guardrails where it really shifted, intentionally or unintentionally, it shifted the ownership back to the managers. And for us to be able to say, it's really your decision. Like here's how you should think about making this decision. But I'm not going to tell you that you can't pay more than this or you have to do this. There's just implications for each of those decisions. And we're going to show you in the tool and in the data what the implication of those decisions are and help partner with you to make sure that we're making the right ones. And that's a hugely empowering use of technology, especially in the comp space.
Yeah. I guess, Sean, chime in a little bit, because I know you've done some work in the sort of comp planning technology
Yeah.
space in the course of your life. And I know one of your theories was to sort of make it less spreadsheet-like and more like push a good decision. And here's how you do that.
I'll agree with Holly. Nobody likes it because every time that they say that managers, they want all this stuff, I'm like, what they really want is the process to go away, right? Like I think that is on. Nobody gets asked during the interview process what your comp planning philosophy is, how you deal with it, whatever. Probably even in people in comp, right? Like don't get asked. So yeah, I the guardrails. I like the translation to human. Can't mess up too much. Yeah, I think if you give them maybe from a different angle, the Daniel Kahneman thing, just because I'm not very educated, Holly, but once in a while I like to throw out a behavioral economist that I read a book without pictures.
It makes you sound smart.
Name
Yeah,
dropping.
it didn't even have pictures in it, which was rough. But you give them an anchor point, right? And so the anchor point, but to your point, the justification of why, and then you give them the guardrails. And I think most managers are like, okay, I can see that now. And I understand the rationale, but I think if you just give them the number, then you lose some of that anchoring because they're like, well, kind of what do you know? And then you get the parental unit because I told you so mode, which as a parental unit, never goes well, right? At some point. So I think so I really like your, whether you start with the rationale and give them kind of more discretion or you give them all the rationale and then give them some discretion. I think just giving them that rationale, I'm also a believer you do it over time. Like I think you just can't do it not the way they did it before, where you send a 40-page PowerPoint, 2 months before, and then they forget about it. But I like how you mentioned like inflow with a tool and like it's all right there and they can just go do this process. And then honestly, they just want to make it go away. We all do. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody loves it.
It's kind of an interesting tension we're highlighting there, just because we haven't said AI and we're 40 minutes into this, and that's very rare.
The record.
But I feel like the comp tech market is sort of saying, no, let's try to automate more, like smarter recommendations so that we make the process go away. Like a manager opens it and it's done. But then at the same time, I also hear us saying like there's value in helping them make the right decision. So I guess it's a kind of a curious tension between the more I do it for you, the more right it is, but the less you're involved in it, right? And I think that's sort of this interesting moment of, is it AI led? Is it AI delivered? Is it just guardrails, right? Like where do you land on the spectrum will be an interesting point. Because I think you both sort of spoken
between agentic though, right? Big difference between agentic technology here and generative, right? And getting a lot of it done for you, so they don't have to run the math. Or are they actually using a generative thing? Because to Holly's point, click, 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 like that's highly annoying. So if it can be done and they can spend that time doing decisioning instead of working through a spreadsheet or something else to make the numbers match, like I think that's a huge piece too.
But you're back again to how do you help humans interact with all of these tools, right? I mean, AI supported and delivering the answer and saying, but here's how to make sure that that's still the right decision. Like, here are the things that you should be thinking about. Definitely use it to make it easier, make the recommendation, but sense check that recommendation too. Use your brain and make sure that it's doing the thing that you intend for it to do, right?
I think the biggest thing that's going to help in all this, Paul, is the pay transparency piece, because now comp and TA, whoever through this process, have the opportunity to educate the end user what's happening. So the manager is not now the bearer of that, bad news package that's out there, for most of the people. And I think comp HR, has the opportunity now to be transparent with why. And I guess, Paul, what you had done before, like how do I translate this to human and tell everyone, because then the expectation isn't as bad, right? Because one of the reasons there's peanut butter spreading, I'm convinced that is just a pile of humans. And the easy answer to still work with someone for the next 364 days is give them all the same percent and make that crap go away. The human nature part of it is what gets in the way, not the math.
Make it less uncomfortable. For me as the leader, selfishly, right?
Yeah. And I think that the burden on comp people, and this is a call to action, not a complaint. I think it's more, we have to be willing to engage in the why, not just the what, right? So it's not just, well, look, we have a range. Don't go above it. Or people who are high in the range should get a lower raise than those low in the range. Well, why? Like it's okay to say that. And it's probably still true. But in order for transparency to work, we have to be ready to explain the reasons, whether that's budget, whether that's just here's how we, philosophy thing. Like there's reasons, just share them. Like that's the transparency we need to get ready to have. It's
That's
not
the
sharing a
cool
range.
part,
That's
though,
easy.
right? That's the cool part, I think, of, people saw pay transparency and were like, oh shit, right? Like this is coming. But actually for comp, you should be looking at it and be like, this is the greatest thing ever, because I'm of the age of where, like you had to go visit Holly if you shared what you made, or they explained the pay range or went at someone else made and how we got there, right? Like that was like a, go to jail, do not pass go, end up down in there. And so now you have this opportunity. I think, look at it as an opportunity, Paul, like you're saying, this is an opportunity, not a penalty phase on transparency.
Yeah, it always feels like magic behind the scenes stuff to the employee, And I think in a lot of areas still we treat it like this secret thing that we don't want to tell you the math of how we got to the math.
Yeah. Same for TA, like to bring it back, to be able to go back and be like, I know you want to pay this person this much. Like, here's the resulting problem, because they can share. Like, we're going to have a huge problem when this happens. And the hiring manager and TA can, I've said it a bunch of times, Paul, very few, none, I would guess, have a people philosophy of we hire stupid people. They generally want to hire smart people. And so, you go to the TA and the HRBP and you say, here's the problem, that they'll see it, right? Most of the time, you just have to explain it.
Yeah, totally. So we like to close with sort of a consistent question. So Holly, if you could magically wave the magic wand and change one thing about HR, what would it be?
She's a unique perspective on
Just
this
one thing?
I know.
Yeah, just one thing.
We'll give you
Just one
two.
thing?
We'll give you two.
You can't go on, for
Right.
all
Like
of them.
the genie only comes out of the lamp in limited supply.
Well, she might be smart to say HR. Like, yeah. No, one thing in HR, automagically.
One thing in HR. Gosh, that's a tough one. I think that one of the things I'd still like us to see us move faster is on this integrated partnership. Not to play into this session too much, but we've been talking about like the role of the strategic HRBP and collaboration across HR for years and years and years. Sherm's been talking about it since the beginning of my career, and I still don't think we have it figured out. And unfortunately, I think it deteriorates the trust with our business a lot of times when they see us as a fragmented unit. And so, like, not to overly underpin, the conversation that we're having today, but all the teams in HR need to work better together. And it seems like this thing that is really easy to talk about and really hard to do in practice. And I still can't figure out why, honestly. I think we're constantly chipping away at like, what does good partnership look like? How do HRBPs and TA partner? How do they then partner with comp? How do we all get on the same page with what we're trying to do and have a shared vision, but also how we bring the business along for that? And we know change is hard. We know change management is hard. So these aren't things that are going to happen unless you had the magic wand. But I did think we'd make more progress as an industry on this so far. And it still feels like it's very challenged in a lot of areas. Would you agree with that, though, or do you have a different assessment?
I think it stems from the fact that HR is more complicated than other people know.
Yeah.
Multiplied by the fact that they are, I won't say never, but let's just go with rarely overstaffed and overfunded. And so I think that together goes with, you're always chasing, can't see the forest for the trees, followed by a complexity that, if anyone goes through the backside, to be honest, I think it's HR's fault. And I'll say this with they've hidden how bad it is, the duck analogy. Like when you do benefits enrollment, like, sure, it takes me 5 minutes because they've made it easy. Working with all the TPAs,
good Lord,
you can have that crap. Like, I want nothing to do with that. And all the stuff that went into the beginning of that and going out the back. So I think that, partially it's their fault because it looks easy. And for a user, these are things that are like, I have benefits, so therefore I understand benefits. I get paid. I understand pay. But when they look at like the manufacturing floor, you're like, I have no idea how that gets done. It's complicated. But this stuff's complicated. I agree with you 100%, because then the perception becomes like, well, how come you guys can't get your act together between you guys? None of this is remarkably hard. How come you guys can't get it together? So I think that would be awesome, because then it would look like a cohesive team going out and, be awesome. So I think that's a great one, personally.
I agree. I think, I took great pride in the T-shaped leader model, right? Like you got to know enough about everybody else's job. I think what I learned in-house over that tenure was that surface level wasn't enough to really think in a more integrated fashion. Like you had to get in the business a bit, right? So that the top of the T needs to be a little bit thicker in order for us to really integrate well, because you've got to know more about the pressures, the challenges, the lingo to really partner nicely.
I do think you bring a unique perspective, Holly, having been in the COEs in different places. And I do think when people start in a specific silo in HR, they don't get, benefits doesn't get to walk inside of comp, and they don't get to walk in other, and they also misunderstand. And so then it just, it just multiplies the perception from the outside when they can't figure out what the other person's doing because they think their job's like, how hard can benefits be, right? It's once a year. Big deal, right? Hey, comp, we just do raises once a year. How hard can comp possibly be, right? And they've got
or
that.
I hear a lot of like, well, the brokers do all the work, so they just give it to them and turn it on in Workday, right?
So I do think it starts a little bit of like, people in glass houses type of thing, making sure you go understand it because, personally, my journey having been in like expatriation and comp and Ben, you're like, all of these are flipping hard. And complicated and, escalate quickly from, when you go 30,000 feet down to ground level. So I think I would flip that around a little, Holly, that people should go walk a mile in their shoes or go learn a little bit about those other roles and just to have a little bit of empathy when you're calling the other folks.
Yeah. I mean, I'm biased. That rotation changed my life. Like it was super meaningful for me in my career journey to see both sides of the coin. It is ironic for me that still HR, who is out there in the business advocating for growth and stretch roles and expansion of responsibilities and career pathing and all of these things, we don't do it well ourselves. Like we kind of hold things tight to the chest to say, well, gosh, if you're a recruiter, like what possibly could you know about being an HRBP? And it goes back to that concept of like, can we drink our own medicine for a minute and say, can somebody do 70% of the job? Are they a great recruiter? Do we think they can learn to do the HRBP role? Like, let's give them a chance. Comp in particular is always the one. It's like, well, you can rotate everywhere else except for comp because like you need to be super specialized there. I don't know if that's entirely true. Like there are ways to get people the exposure and understanding of like the hands-on work. And again, I'm biased, but I think it's just so critical to.
I think it's amazing, but I think, Holly, it's that HR does not, like I said, not just placating to the HR industry. Like you don't see many overstaffed HR functions, right? Because they've been a cost center and been made lean. And so I think that rotation of like, hey, do you have 20% extra time to go rotate and learn something? Like Saturday is my 20% extra time, so I'll take a hard pass on that. Like, I think that's so that's the issue from a company standpoint. Like, how do you make that happen to have a better, more well-rounded team? It's hard. I mean, just like benefits from the top, it looks easy. Just do a rotation. No problem.
I think the other thing we have to talk about here, though, is my ask of the comp teams is it sounds like we have a case for building a job family for office decorators. We need to come up with like a fancy name for this, but I think we've established like that partnership is important. We probably need a job family for
I mean, it's an interesting because it's sort of dependent on attrition because it's a one-time thing. Like, I guess you could redecorate the office, right? It's how do you workforce plan for an office decorator? Like how many of them do
interior design / office manager / Nerf gun purchaser? Like,
yeah.
Baker and let's not forget 12-pound brisket provider, right? Like you have to put all those.
You can ship that though. Just I'll reiterate. Feel free to ship that. And then put open only during the totally rewarding chats. I want to be there.
Right?
Could have been a reveal. I love it.
Right.
Well, thank you, Holly, for joining. I don't feel like I was roasted too poorly. If anything, my ego's maybe slightly.
I see what you did there with the brisket.
You know how it is. Thank you for your time. We appreciate this, Holly. It was super fun. It's always good to see you, and we definitely appreciate insights from outside of our space and kind of hearing from the front line. So thanks for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Anytime. Appreciate it. Thank you both.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.